Welcome to, or welcome back to, the Agatha May Detective Agency. I'm Agatha May, and in this video, we'll be looking at the email that Mica Francis sent the Secretary of State when John Paul Miller took her notary seal, along with her other belongings, while she was in the hospital. I'm sure he was just stealing her belongings for safekeeping, right? Just kidding. I don't think that at all. I'll also be announcing some changes to the channel. In her email, Mica mentions that she's worried that John Paul might use her seal for nefarious reasons, and that was definitely a valid worry. But let's stop and think about this for a minute. Mica knew John Paul very well. They'd been married for over 6 years, and she'd known him for more than twice as long as that. She didn't hesitate to think that he would use her seal to illegally notarize documents. In fact, she was so worried he would, she emailed the Secretary of State's office to make sure they knew he might do it. My husband and I will never split up, but hypothetically, if we did, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt he would never use my notary seal because he has integrity and is possibly the most wholesome person I've ever known. John Paul doesn't seem to have instilled that same kind of confidence in Mica. It appears she thought he was willing to break the law to get what he wants. Mica was also worried that John Paul hadn't filed the Dare to Care missions as a 501c3. But as long as the mission fund was part of Solid Rock Ministries, it didn't need to be its own nonprofit. I checked, and if you try to donate to Dare to Care, the money goes to Solid Rock. And since it's going to Solid Rock, they could even have a separate bank account for the mission fund, and it still wouldn't need to be its own 501c3. If she had gained control of the charity in a divorce, she would have needed to file an application to become a 501c3, since it would no longer be part of the church, unless there was a stipulation in the postnuptial, and if she actually signed the postnuptial. I've only found 2 pages of the agreement, and I'm unsure if it was ever signed, and even more unsure if it was ever filed. In the postnuptial agreement, there is a clause about Solid Rock Ministries, and it reads that John Paul owns Solid Rock Ministries. I know some people have been astounded that someone could actually own a church, but leave it to John Paul, right? The agreement further states if at the time of separation or divorce, John Paul still owns Solid Rock Ministries, Mica could keep her job there. Because that's what we always want to do if we divorce someone like John Paul. We want to stick around and work with him and have to see him all the time. Ugh. No thank you. The agreement further states that Mica would be entitled to the Africa Missions Dare to Care and the bank account for it and could continue to use Solid Rock Ministries, and then it cuts off. But it's possible the rest of it was that she can use Solid Rock Ministries' tax-exempt status. Speaking of that, what might be surprising to some is that as long as a church meets the requirements to be a 501c3, they don't have to actually file paperwork with the IRS to be considered a nonprofit. They are automatically granted nonprofit status. Here is information about it taken directly from the IRS. Churches, including integrated auxiliaries, and conventions or associations of churches that meet the requirements of Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code are automatically considered tax-exempt and are not required to apply for and obtain recognition of exempt status from the IRS. Now, churches can file with the IRS to become a 501c3 nonprofit to reinforce their legitimacy in the eyes of their congregants, but it isn't necessary for them to. Solid Rock has maintained a 501c3 status since 2015. I'm not sure it's doing much to bolster their credibility these days, though. Unfortunately, because of this leniency given churches about being a nonprofit, it's much easier for crimes like money laundering to occur between the pulpit and the pews. Am I insinuating that I think it's possible that there might be a little cleansing of the cash at Solid Rock? No, I'd never do that. And just so you know, I do realize that money laundering doesn't consist of a laundromat and a jug of Tide. So what if Mica had told John Paul that she was going to turn him into the IRS? It wouldn't be the lack of filing the charity as a 501c3 that would worry him, but rather just the fact that the IRS would be poking their nose in the church's business. If he was hiding illegal financial transactions, and I'm not saying he was, but if he was, he definitely wouldn't want the government accounting geeks to pay him a visit. Oh, come on, Pee-wee. Just fess up and tell us what you've been doing with the missions money. And while you're at it, tell Charles I don't beat my wife Randall to fess up too. I'm going to have a future video about Solid Rock's Kenya Mission Fund, because I found puzzle pieces that just don't fit together. Mica also wrote in her email that the church was planning on making some large purchases soon. Even though that John Paul tried saying the church's airplane was donated, I don't believe him, mostly because he's the one who said it. I think Planey McPlainface was just one of those large expenditures Mica was talking about. I've had people tell me that John Paul doesn't even like flying, but I remember seeing part of one of his sermons where he was being smarmy and told the congregation that while there were people on the ground talking badly about him, he'd be up in the plane with solid rock on the side of it. He also said that the church obtained the plane so he could travel to other churches to be a guest speaker. I think John Paul wants to be another Jesse Duplantis. Maybe John Paul could change his last name to something similar, like Duplicitous. I still hold to the idea that the plane was purchased for Mark Kaufman in exchange for something other than him being the music director at the church. I mean, those parodies are super cringy, and Mark might be talented, but is he hundreds of thousands of dollars talented? But what were the other big-ticket items? Was one a DeLorean? They start about $60,000 if you want one that runs. It could have been large expenditures for new buildings that are probably no longer necessary, considering that Solid Rock is down to 50 or so congregants. Does anyone else think that pretty soon John Paul might be selling the property the church bought for the new buildings? If there are upcoming lawsuits, he might want to have a little more pocket change on hand. Since the paper trail was mentioned in previous text messages, along with John Paul's birth certificate, let's talk about that for a minute. I don't know that Mica was worried that he wasn't actually John Paul Miller. But what if she found out he'd been using aliases? Maybe she found fake IDs. That could be why she wanted that paper trail, and part of why she was so upset by what she'd found. I'm talking about aliases other than Spider-Man. What would John Paul use an alias for? Let me know what you think in the comments. And now we're going to completely change the subject. I want to say thank you all so much for subscribing, liking, sending super thanks, commenting, and sharing my videos. When I started this channel, I had no idea it would take off like it has. I don't want to sound like I'm being mopey or feeling sorry for myself, but I spent the first 10 years of my adult life just surviving, and then another long stretch of years healing from the abuse I went through as a child. And then came a time of quiet and just being and learning what it meant to be happy and at peace. That time of just being started to become a time of complacency, and that's not anywhere I've ever wanted to be. In the past year, I've been trying to figure out what I really wanted to be when I grow up. I've had a variety of careers and have done fine with them, but none of them ever made me feel as though it was something I could do really well and enjoy doing it. This channel is the culmination of my past careers, and I finally figured out the answer to, what do you want to be when you grow up? I've been a writer, a graphic designer, a musician, and yes, there will eventually be songs on this channel, and a researcher. Making these videos is the one thing I've done that allows me to use all of those things. Plus, I get to be sarcastic, snarky, and petty. Those are just bonuses. Thanks to my patient, understanding, and generous husband, I have been able to slow down my other side gigs and pursue building a YouTube channel. I know there are people who feel as though content creators shouldn't get paid for their work, and that when it's true crime, they feel we're benefiting from the pain of others. I like to think that we're benefiting from trying to help get justice for the victims. At least that's what I'm trying to do. News anchors, reporters, detectives, police, everyone involved with crime is paid for their work. But I am not here to change your mind if you truly believe creators shouldn't try to make a living at creating. I do put a lot of effort into my videos, and while I enjoy it, it is still a lot of work. I've been maintaining a couple of other side gigs while building my channel, and I would love to be able to let those go and concentrate fully on building the Agatha May Detective Agency. Not only would it free up a lot of mental and physical energy, but it would also clear a lot of product out of our house, and I'm sure my husband would appreciate that. So I'm going to start offering memberships, and there will be 3 levels. I chose characters from Nancy Drew books as the level names because when I made my first question and answer video, I was asked if I was an actual detective, and I answered that I wasn't, but I did read a lot of Nancy Drew books growing up. For those who aren't familiar with Nancy Drew, she was a teenage super sleuth who always solved the mystery, but she had help from her best friends, Bess Marvin and George Fane, and George was a girl. Bess was the timid one of the trio and didn't enjoy plunging into danger, but she was very loyal and went along with the investigation. George was a tomboy, and she was always ready for danger. So the membership levels will be: the Bess Marvin level is $2.99 a month and will include custom icons that will indicate how long you've been a member of the channel, custom emojis to use in comments, and preferred comment response, which means that I'll respond to the comments you leave on videos. The George Fane level is $4.99 a month and will include everything in the Best level, as well as member-only polls, and these will help direct the channel in new directions, and an extra weekly video. And this is a video that will be information that didn't make it into other videos. The Nancy Drew level is $9.99 a month and will include everything in the Bess and in the George levels, plus it will include a members-only interactive live once a week and discounted merchandise. And I have started working on some merchandising. And some ideas I have is t-shirts, stickers, custom big head stickers if you'd like, and maybe even an Agatha plush doll and more. Speaking of, someone commented in our Facebook group that they know someone who made t-shirts, and if you're watching, can you please leave the information again? Thank you. For those of you who haven't joined our Facebook group, you should, and there will be a link in the description. I have activated the memberships, so you should be able to click on the button and go from there. And if you're not inclined to be a member, I promise I will still love you as much as I do now. And I do love all of you. We might not ever meet in person, but you all have my heart and all the love I have to give. And it's a lot. Thank you so much for watching and for all the happiness you've brought me. Until next time, stay safe and be happy.